4.48 miles, and I jogged 1.1 miles today, and then yesterday I jogged 1 mile and walked 5.8 miles. So my goal is to reach 20 miles by the end of the week, and I have a lot of appointments this week. Not like work, like dentist and mortgage and electrical appointments. And I need to somehow fit in donated requests videos this week. So, and I have a concert to go to this week. I have so much. And I only slept 3 hours yesterday. It's over an hour past my bedtime today. But hopefully after I do this video, I'll be able to sleep really well. I'm already getting tired. So I'm gonna read The Girl Who Played with Fire by Stieg Larsson. Sorry if I mispronounced that. This was supposed to be right after The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, but I at least watched the movie, so it's not the same thing at all. Sorry, my roommate is cleaning the kitchen, or his dishes at least, and he doesn't know I'm making a video. Because why am I gonna make him be quiet when it's also his place to live? Prologue. She lay on her back, fastened by leather straps to a narrow bed with a steel frame. The harness was tight across her ribcage. Her hands were manacled to the sides of the bed. She had long since given up trying to free herself. She was awake, but her eyes were closed. If she opened her eyes, she would find herself in darkness. The only light was a faint strip that seeped in above the door. She had a bad taste in her mouth and longed to be able to brush her teeth. She was listening for the sound of footsteps, which would mean he was coming. She had no idea how late it was, but she had sensed that it was getting too late for him to visit her. A sudden vibration in the bed made her open her eyes. It was as if a machine of some sort had started up somewhere in the building. After a few seconds, she was no longer sure whether she was imagining it. She marked off another day in her head. It was the 43rd day of her imprisonment. Her nose itched, and she turned her head so that she could rub it against the pillow. She was sweating. It was airless and hot in the room. She had a simple nightdress that was bunching up beneath her. If she moved her hips, she could just hold the cloth with her first 2 fingers and pull the nightdress down on one side, an inch or so at a time. She did the same on the other side, but there was still a fold under the small of her back. The mattress was lumpy. Her isolation sharply amplified all the tiny sensations that she would not otherwise have noticed. The harness was loose enough that she could change position and lie on her side, but that was uncomfortable because then she would have to keep one hand behind her, which made her arm keep going to sleep. She was not afraid, but she did feel a great pent-up rage. At the same time, she was troubled by unpleasant fantasies about what was going to happen to her. She detested this helplessness. No matter how hard she tried to concentrate on something else to pass the time and to distract her from the situation she was in, the fear came trickling out. It hovered like a cloud of gas around her, threatening to penetrate her pores and poison her. She had discovered that the most effective method of keeping the fear at bay was to fantasize about something that gave her a feeling of strength. She closed her eyes and conjured up the smell of gasoline. He was sitting in a car with the window rolled down. She ran to the car, poured the gasoline through the window, and lit a match. It took only a moment. The flames blazed up. He writhed in agony, and she heard his screams of terror and pain. She could smell burned flesh and more acrid stench of plastic and upholstery turning to carbon in seats. She must have dozed off because she did not hear the footsteps, but she was wide awake when the door opened. The light from the doorway blinded her. He had come, at any rate. He was tall. She did not know how old he was, but he had reddish-brown tangled hair and a sparse goatee, and he wore glasses with black frames. He smelled of aftershave. She hated the smell of him. He stood at the foot of the bed and observed her for a long time. She hated his silence. She could see him only in a silhouette from the light in the doorway. Then he spoke to her. He had a dark, clear voice that stressed pedantically each word. She hated his voice. He told her that it was her birthday and he wanted to wish her a happy birthday. His tone was not unfriendly or ironical. It was neutral. She thought he was smiling. She hated him. He came closer and went around to the head of the bed. He laid the back of a moist hand on her forehead and ran his fingers along her hairline in a gesture that was... I always think of the game gestures, but in a gesture that was probably intended to be friendly. It was his birthday present to her. She hated his touch. She saw his mouth move, but she shut out the sound of his voice. She did not want to listen. She did not want to answer. She heard him raise his voice, a hint of irritation at her failure to respond. He talked about a mutual trust. After a few minutes, he stopped. She ignored his gaze. Then he shrugged and began adjusting her leather straps. He tightened the harness around her chest a bit and leaned over her. She twisted suddenly to the left away from him. As abruptly as she could, and as far as the straps would allow, she pulled up her knees to her chin and kicked hard at his head. She aimed at his Adam's apple, and the tip of her toe hit him somewhere below his jaw. But he was ready for that and turned away, so it was only a light blow. She tried the kick again, but he was out of reach. She let her legs sink back down on the bed. The sheets slid down on the floor. Her nightdress had slid up above her hips. He stood still for a long time without saying a word. Then he walked around the bed and tightened the foot restraint. She tried to pull her legs up, but he grabbed hold of one ankle, forced her knee down with his other hand, and fastened her foot with a leather strap. Sorry, I was about to cough and I didn't want to. Did it anyways. Oh, I need to resituate myself. Oh, my legs are hurting so bad from this walk. Now she was utterly helpless. He picked up the sheet from the floor and covered her. He watched her in silence for 2 minutes. She could sense his excitement in the dark. Even though he did not show it, he undoubtedly had an erection. She knew that he would reach out and touch her. Then he turned and left, closing the door behind him. She heard him bolt it, which was totally unnecessary because she had no way of getting free from the bed. She lay for several minutes looking at the narrow strip of light over the door. Then she moved and tried to feel how tight the straps were. She could pull her knees up a bit, but the harness and the foot restraints grew taut. Immediately she relaxed. She lay still, staring at nothing. She waited. She thought about a gasoline can and a match. She saw him drenched with gasoline. She could actually feel a box of matches in her hand. She shook it. It rattled. She opened the box and selected a match. She heard him say something, but she shut her ears, did not listen to the words. She saw the expression on his face as she moved the match towards the striking surface. She heard the scraping sound of sulfur. It sounded like a drawn-out thunderclap. She saw the match burst into flame. She smiled a hard smile and steeled herself. It was her 13th birthday. Part 1. Irregular Equations, December 16th through 20th. Equations are classified by the highest power value of the exponent of their unknowns. If this is 1, the equation is of the first degree. If this is 2, the equation is of second degree, and so on. Equations of higher degree than 1 yield multiple possible values for their unknown quantities. These values are known as roots. The first degree equation, the linear equation, 3x minus 9 equals 0. Root x equals 3. Chapter 1, Thursday, December 16th through Friday, December 17th. Lisbeth Salander pulled her sunglasses down to the tip of her nose and squinted from beneath the brim of her sun hat. She saw the woman from room 32 come out of the hotel side entrance and walk to one of the green and white striped Chase's lounge? Rooms? I don't know. Beside the pool. Her gaze was fixed on the ground and her progress seemed unsteady. Salander had seen her only at a distance. She reckoned the woman was around 35, but she looked as though she could be anything from 25 to 50. She had shoulder-length brown hair, an oval face, and a body that was straight out of a mail-order catalog for lingerie. She had a black bikini, sandals, and purple-tinted sunglasses. She was American and spoke with a southern accent. She dropped a yellow sun hat next to the chair and signaled to the bartender at Ella Carmichael's bar. Salander put her book down on her lap and sipped her iced coffee before reaching for a pack of cigarettes. Without turning her head, she shifted her gaze to the horizon. She could just see the Caribbean through the group of palm trees and the rhododendrons in the front of the hotel. A yacht was on its way north towards St. Lucia or Dominica. Further out, she could see the outline of a gray freighter heading south in the direction of Guyana. A breeze made the smarting heat bearable, but she felt a drop of sweat trickling into her eyebrow. Salander did not care for sunbathing. She had spent her days as far as possible in shade, and even now was under the awning of the terrace, and yet she was brown as a nut. She had on khaki shorts and a black top. She listened to the strange music from steel drums flying out of the speakers at the bar. She could not tell the difference between Sven Ingvars and Nick Cave, but steel drums fascinated her. It seemed hardly feasible that anyone could tune an oil barrel, and even less credible that the barrel could make music like nothing else in the world. She thought these sounds were like magic. She suddenly felt irritated and looked again at the woman who had just been handed a glass of some orange-colored drink. It was not Lisbeth Salander's problem, but she could not comprehend why the woman stayed for 4 nights ever since the couple had arrived. Salander had listened to the muted terror being played out in the room next door to hers. She had heard crying and low, excitable voices, and sometimes the unmistakable sounds of slaps. The man responsible for the blows, Salander assumed he was the woman's husband, had straight dark hair, parted down in the middle in an old-fashioned style, and he seemed to be in Granada on business. What kind of business, Salander had no idea, but every morning the man appeared with his briefcase and a jacket and tie and had coffee in the hotel bar before he went outside to look for a taxi. He would come back to the hotel in late afternoon when he took a swim and sat with his wife by the pool. They had dinner together in what on the surface seemed to be a quiet and loving way. The woman may have had a few too many drinks, but her intoxication was not obnoxious. Each night the commotion in the next door room had started just as Salander was going to bed with a book about the mysteries of mathematics. It did not sound like a full-on assault as far as Salander could tell through the wall of his one repetitive, tedious argument. The night before, Salander had not been able to contain her curiosity. She had gone out to the balcony to listen through the couple's open balcony door. For more than an hour, the man had paced back and forth in the room, declaring that he was a jerk who didn't deserve her. Again and again, he said that she must think he was a fraud. No, she would answer, she didn't, and she tried to calm him. He became more intense and seemed to give her a shake. So at last she gave him the answer he wanted. Yes, you are a fraud. And he immediately took this as a pretext to berate her. He called her a whore, which was an accusation that Salander would have taken measures to combat if it had been directed at her. It had not been, but nevertheless she thought for a long time about whether she ought to take some sort of action. Salander had listened in astonishment to this rancorous bickering, which all of a sudden ended with something that sounded like a slap in the face. She had been on the point of going into the hotel corridor to corridor to kick in her neighbor's door when silence descended over the room. Now she scrutinized the woman by the pool. She could see a faint bruise on her shoulder and a scrape on her hip, but no other injury. Some months earlier, Salander had read in an article in Popular Science that someone had left behind at Leonardo da Vinci Airport in Rome, and she developed a vague fascination with the obscure topic of spherical astronomy. On impulse, she had made her way into the university bookshop in Rome to buy some of the key works on the subject. To be able to get a grasp of spherical astronomy, however, she had to immerse herself in the deeper mysteries of mathematics. In the course of her travels in recent months, she had been to other university bookshops to seek out more books. Her studies had been unsystematically and without any real objective, at least until she wandered into the university bookshop in Miami and came out with Dimensions in Mathematics by Dr. L.C. Parnault, Harvard University Press, 1999. That was just before she went to the Florida Keys and began island hopping through the Caribbean. She had been to Guadeloupe 2 nights in a hideous dump, Dominica, fun and relaxed 5 nights, Barbados 1 night at an American hotel where she felt terribly unwelcome. In St. Lucia, 9 nights. She would have considered staying longer had she not made an enemy of a slow-witted young hoodlum who haunted the bar of her backstreet hotel. Finally, she lost patience and whacked him on the head with a brick, checked out of the hotel, and took a ferry to St. George's, the capital of Grenada. This was a country she had never heard of before. She bought her ticket for the boat. She had come ashore on Grenada in a tropical rainstorm at 10, one November morning from the Caribbean Traveler. She learned that the Grenada was known as Spice Island and was one of the world's leading producers of nutmeg. The island had a population of 120,000, but another 200,000 Grenadians lived in the United States, Canada, or Britain, which gave some indication of the employment market in their homeland. The terrain was mountainous around a dormant volcano, Grand Tang. Grenada was one of the many small former British colonies. In 1795, Julien Fidon, a black planter of mixed French ancestry, led an uprising inspired by the French Revolution. Troops were sent to shoot, hang, or maim the rebels. What had shaken the colonial regime was that even poor whites, so-called petits blancs, had joined Fidon's rebellion without the least regard for racial boundaries. The uprising was crushed, but Fidon was never captured. He vanished into the mountains, Grand Tang, and became a Robin Hood-like legend. Some 200 years later, in 1979, a lawyer called Maurice Bishop started a new revolution, which the guidebook said was inspired by the communist dictatorships in Cuba and Nicaragua. Nicaragua. Oh my gosh, I can't talk today. Oh, my chest. Ooh. But Salander was given a different picture of things when she met Philip Campbell, teacher, librarian, and Baptist preacher. She had taken a room in his guest house for the first few days. The gist of the story was that Bishop was a popular folk leader who had disposed an insane dictator, a UFO nutcase who had devoted part of his meager national budget to chasing flying saucers. Bishop had lobbied for economic democracy and introduced the country's first legislation for sexual equality, and then in 1983 he was assassinated. There followed a massacre of more than 100 people, including the foreign minister, the Minister for Women's Affairs, and some senior trade union leaders. Then the United States invaded the country and set up a democracy. As far as Grenada was concerned, this meant that unemployment rose from around 6% to almost 50%, and the cocaine trade once more became the largest single source of income. Campbell shook his head in dismay at the description of Salander's guidebook and gave her some tips of the kinds of people and neighborhoods she should avoid after dark. In Salander's case, such advice normally fell on deaf ears. However, she had avoided making the acquaintance of the criminal element on Grenada by falling in love with Grand Anse Beach, just south of St. George's, a sparsely populated beach that went on for miles. There she could walk for hours without having to talk to or even encounter another living soul. She moved to the Keys, one of the few American hotels on Grand Anse, and stayed for 7 weeks, doing little more than walking on the beach and eating a local fruit called chin-ups, which reminded her of her sour Swedish gooseberries. She found them delightful. It was off-season, and barely a third of the rooms at the Keys Hotel were occupied. The only problem was that both her peace and quiet and her preoccupation with mathematical studies had been disturbed by subdued terror in the room next door. Michael Blomkvist rang the doorbell of Solander's apartment on Lundegatan. He did not expect her to open the door, but he had fallen into the habit of calling at her apartment every week or so to see whether anything had changed. He lifted the flap on the mailbox and could see the same heap of junk mail. It was late and too dark to make out how much of the pile might have grown since his last visit. He stood on the landing for a moment before turning on his heel in frustration. He strolled leisurely to his own apartment to Belmangsgatan, put on some coffee, and looked through the evening papers before the late TV news report came on. He was irritated and depressed not to know where Salander was. He felt stirrings of unease and wondered for the thousandth time what had happened. He had invited Salander to his cabin in Sandham for the Christmas holidays. They had gone for long walks and calmly discussed the repercussions of the dramatic events in which they had both been involved over the past year. When Blomkvist went through what he came to think of as an early midlife crisis. He had been convicted of libel and spent 2 months in prison. His professional career as a journalist had been in the gutter, and he had resigned from his position as publisher of the magazine Millennium, more or less in disgrace. But at that point, everything had turned around. A commission to write a biography of the industrialist Henrik Wenger, which he had regarded as an absurdly well-paid form of therapy, had turned into a terrifying hunt for a serial killer. During this manhunt, he met Salander. Blomkvist unconsciously stroked the faint scar that the noose had left beneath his left ear. Salander had not only helped him track down the killer, she had saved his life. Time and again, she had amazed him with her odd talents. She had a photographic memory and phenomenal computer skills. Blomkvist considered himself virtually computer illiterate, but Salander handled computers as if she had made a pact with the devil. He had come to realize that she was a world-class hacker, and with an exclusive international community devoted to computer crime at the highest level. And not only to combating it, she was a legend. She was known online only as Wasp. It was her ability to pass freely into other people's computers that had given him the material which transformed his professional humiliation into what was to be the Winterstrom affair, a scoop that a year later was still the subject of international police investigations into unsolved financial crimes, and Blomkvist was still being invited to appear on TV talk shows. At the time, a year ago, he had thought of the scoop with colossal satisfaction, as vengeance and as rehabilitation, but the satisfaction had soon ebbed. Within a few weeks, he was sick and tired of answering the same questions from journalists and the financial police. "I'm sorry, but I can't reveal my sources." When a reporter from the English language Azerbaijan Times had come all the way to Stockholm to ask him the same questions, was the last straw. Blomkvist cut the interviews to a minimum, and then in recent months he had relented only when the women from She on TV4 talked him into it, and that had happened only because the investigation had apparently moved into a new phase. Blomkvist's cooperation with the women from TV4 had another dimension. She had been the first journalist to pounce on the story, and without her program on the evening that Millennium released the scoop, it might not have made the impact it did. Only did Blomkvist find out that she had had to fight tooth and nail to convince her editor to run it. There had been massive resistance to giving any prominence to that clown at Millennium, and right up to the moment she went on air, it was far from that certain that the battery of company lawyers would give the story the all clear. Several of her more senior colleagues had given it a thumbs down and told her that if she was wrong, her career was over. She stood her ground and it became the story of the year. She had covered the story herself that first week. After all, she was the only reporter who had thoroughly researched the subject, but sometime before Christmas, Blomkvist noticed that all the new angles in the story had been handed over to male colleagues. Around New Year's, Blomkvist heard through the grapevine that she had been elbowed out with the excuse that such an important story should be handled by experienced financial reporters and not some little girl from Gotland or Bergslagen or wherever the hell she was from. The next time TV4 called, Blomkvist explained frankly that he would talk to them only if she asked the questions. Days of sullen silence went by before the boys at TV4 capitulated. Blomkvist's waning interest in the Winterstrom's affair coincided with Salander's disappearance from his life. He still could not understand what had happened. They had parted 2 days after Christmas, and he had not seen her for the rest of the week. On the day before New Year's Eve, he telephoned her, but there was no answer. On New Year's Eve, he went to her apartment twice and rang the bell. The first time there had been lights on, but she had not answered the door. The second time there were no lights. On New Year's Day, he called her again, and still there was no answer, but he did get a message from the telephone company saying that the subscriber could not be reached. He had seen her twice in the next few days when he could not get a hold of her on the phone. He went to her apartment and sat down to wait on the steps beside her front door. He had brought a book with him, and he waited stubbornly for 4 hours before she appeared through the main entrance just before 11 at night. She was carrying a brown box and stopped short when she saw him. "Hello, Elizabeth," he said, closing his book. She looked at him without expression, no sign of warmth or even friendship in her gaze, then she walked past him and stepped again the door. "Aren't you going to offer me a cup of coffee?" he said. She turned and said in a low voice, "Get out of here. I don't want to ever see you again." Then she shut the door in his face, and he heard her lock it from inside. He was bewildered. 3 days later, he had taken the tunnel Banna from Slusen to see Centralen, and when the train stopped in Gamla stand, he looked out the window and she was standing on the platform, less than 2 yards away. He got sight of her at the exact moment the doors closed. For 5 seconds she stared right through him, as though he were nothing but air, before she turned and walked out of his field of vision as the train began to move. The implication was unmistakable. She wanted nothing to do with him. She had cut him out of her life as surgically and decisively as she deleted files from her computer, and without explanation she had changed her mobile phone number and did not answer her email. Blomqvist sighed, switched off the TV, and went to the window to gaze out City Hall. Perhaps he was making a mistake in going to her apartment from time to time. His attitude had always been that if a woman clearly indicated that she did not want anything to do with him, he would go on his way. Not respecting such a message would, in his eyes, show a lack of respect for her. Blomqvist and Salander had slept together. It had been her initiative, and the relationship had only lasted for half a year. If it was her decision to end the affair, surprisingly as she had started it, then that was okay with Blomqvist. He had no difficulty with the role of ex-boyfriend, if that was what he was, but Salander's total repudiation of him was astonishing. Repudiation? He was not in love with her. They were about as unlike as two people could possibly be, but he was very fond of her and really missed her, as exasperating as she sometimes was. He had thought their liking was mutual. In short, he had felt like an idiot. He stood at the window a long time. Finally, he made a decision. If Salander thought so little of him, she could not even bring herself to greet him when they saw each other in the tunnel Banna, then their friendship was apparently over and the damage irreparable. He would make no attempt to contact her again. If you made it this far, what's your favorite book that you've ever read? And if you don't like to read, what is your favorite TV show or movie that you like to watch? Good night, my dears. I hope you sleep well. And I hope I can sleep tonight, because I could not yesterday. Much love.